The Rio Bravo set was one of the most prestigious in Hollywood in 1958. John Wayne had just finished a grueling shoot in the mountains of Arizona, and now they were back at the studio for interior scenes and final sequences. The picture was going to be massive. Everyone in the industry knew it. The chemistry between Wayne and the younger cast members was electric, or at least it was supposed to be. And at the center of it all, bringing energy and comedy to balance Wayne's stoic intensity, was Dean Martin. But there was a problem. A problem that had been festering under the surface for weeks, something that nobody wanted to talk about directly, but everyone was acutely aware of. The problem was that John Wayne did not approve of Dean Martin, not as an actor, not as a professional, not as anything beyond a distraction that Howard Hawks had insisted on casting. Wayne saw Dean as a lightweight A singer who'd somehow stumbled into acting through a combination of good looks and charm. A man who got by on personality rather than on the actual talent and discipline that Wayne believed separated real actors from pretenders. Wayne had made his entire career on the opposite principle: hard work, dedication, showing up and doing the job, no matter what the cost, no matter how exhausting it was, no matter how many takes it required. They tolerated each other on set because they were professionals, because they had contracts and obligations and reputations to protect, because the script required them to work together, and neither man was the type to let personal feelings interfere with the work, at least not publicly. But it was tense. Everybody on set felt it. The way Wayne would deliver his lines with a slight edge when addressing Dean, like he was speaking to someone beneath him. The way he'd correct Dean's blocking with a tone of voice that suggested he was talking to a child who needed guidance. The way he'd make comments to other cast members, the grips and the electricians and the script supervisors, that made it very clear he thought Dean was beneath him. Beneath the standards of this picture, beneath the standards of cinema itself. Dean never fired back. He never got angry in response. He never showed the frustration that had to be building inside him. He just smiled and moved on and made a joke about it. He'd perfected the art of being dismissed without showing that it bothered him. He'd spent his whole career having people underestimate him, and he'd learned long ago that the best response was to smile and let your work speak for itself. But it was wearing on him. You could see it in his eyes during moments when he thought nobody was watching. The frustration of being constantly diminished by a man whose respect he actually wanted, the pain of being dismissed by an actor he'd idolized for years, the slow accumulation of small humiliations that added up to something larger. The scene they were shooting on this particular day was simple in concept but incredibly difficult in execution. It was a confrontation between Wayne's character and Dean's character. A moment of emotional tension that had to feel real and lived in, that had to show the fracture between them before they came together at the end of the picture. It was the emotional pivot point of the entire film. Everything else that followed, all the action sequences and the comedic beats and the final reconciliation, everything depended on this scene working, on this moment landing, on the audience believing that these two men had actual conflict between them. They'd done 12 takes. 12 times Wayne and Dean had run through the dialogue, the blocking, the subtle movements and expressions that made the scene matter. 12 times they'd reset and tried again. And each time, after the director called cut, Wayne would shake his head slightly at director Howard Hawks. Each time, Hawks would call for another take. Dean never complained, never suggested that they were doing fine, never questioned why they kept going. Just reset and did it again. He moved back to his mark. He straightened his costume, he centered himself, and he did it again. By take 12, Dean was exhausted. You could see it in the slight slump of his shoulders, in the way his eyes had lost some of their spark, in the way his movements had become mechanical rather than organic. But he still showed up, still delivered, still gave everything he had. On the 13th take, something shifted. Something fundamental changed in the air on the set. Dean's performance changed completely. He stopped trying to match Wayne's intensity and instead found something deeper, something more true. He found vulnerability. He found the place where his character was scared and uncertain but determined not to show it. He found the moment where a younger man realizes that the older man he's been trying to impress doesn't respect him, and decides that he's going to do the job anyway, with or without that respect. He was going to be good, he was going to be real, he was going to be honest, even if honesty meant showing weakness. It was brilliant. It was genuinely brilliant. It was honest in a way that most performances never are. It was everything the scene needed to be. It was the kind of take that directors dream about. The kind of moment where you know instantly that you've captured something that can't be recreated. But John Wayne saw it as weakness, as Dean breaking character, as Dean not understanding what the scene was supposed to be, as Dean indulging in some kind of emotional self-expression that had no place in a professional production. Wayne stopped after the take and walked over to Dean. He didn't wait for Hawks to call cut, he just walked. The entire set went quiet instantly. Conversations died mid-sentence. Camera operators looked away. Grips found reasons to be busy with equipment. Everyone knew that Wayne was about to say something and nobody wanted to be in the line of fire. Nobody wanted to be caught watching. "That's not the performance," Wayne said, his voice low but carrying across the now silent set. It was the kind of quiet that only happens on a movie set, where everyone is so attuned to the principal actors that a whisper carries like a shout. That's you being uncertain. That's you not understanding your character. That's you indulging in some kind of emotional vulnerability that doesn't belong in this scene. My character doesn't have time for weakness. Neither should yours. My character is strong, confident, he knows what he wants, and he goes after it. That's what this scene needs. Dean just nodded. He didn't defend himself, didn't explain his choices, didn't point out that vulnerability and strength weren't mutually exclusive. He just nodded and said, "Okay, Duke, let's try it again." "No," Wayne said. "Let's try it again, and this time actually act. Stop feeling your emotions on your face. Control it. Project strength. You're a professional. Act like one." It was a humiliation, delivered quietly enough that it could almost pass for direction, delivered in a tone that suggested Wayne was just being helpful, just offering guidance to a younger actor who needed it. But everyone knew what it really was. It was John Wayne telling Dean Martin that he was a fake, that he wasn't a real actor, that his performance was amateurish and unworthy of the picture, that he was diminishing the film simply by being in it. Dean said nothing, just nodded again, walked back to his mark, waited for Hawks to call action. He stood there and you could see him actively suppressing what he was feeling. You could see him rebuilding the walls. You could see the transformation from genuine artist back to what Wayne thought he was. A lightweight, a singer playing dress-up. They ran the scene again. This time Dean played it exactly as Wayne wanted. Controlled, strong, projecting certainty even in moments where his character should have been uncertain. It was technically proficient. It was also dead. It was a performance with no soul, delivered by an actor who'd stopped trying and was just going through the motions. It was the kind of performance that you could see was performed, if that made sense. It was acting without the truth underneath it. Hawks called cut and didn't immediately call for another take. He stood there for a long moment, looking at Wayne, looking at Dean, understanding exactly what had just happened, understanding that something had broken, understanding that Wayne had taken the best take and beaten it to death through his criticism. "Let's take a break," Hawks said finally, his voice careful and measured. 30 minutes. Everybody offset except principals and crew. Let's clear the soundstage now. The set emptied. Grips and electricians and script supervisors and makeup people all found reasons to be elsewhere. There was a collective understanding that something had happened that needed to be addressed. Hawks pulled Wayne and Dean aside, moving them away from the remaining crew to a corner of the soundstage where they could talk privately. John Hawks said, and his voice was level but carried an edge underneath it, a sharpness that suggested he was about to say something that needed to be said. "I need to talk to you about what just happened." "What are you talking about?" Wayne said. His tone suggested genuine confusion, but there was a defensiveness underneath it. "The kid needs direction. I gave him direction. That's my job as the senior actor on this set. That's what a professional does." "You humiliated him," Hawks said simply. "And more than that, you made him deliver a worse performance. That take, before your comment, take 13, that was the one we use. That was the scene. That was the moment. And you destroyed it because your ego couldn't accept that he might be better at vulnerability than you are? That was weakness," Wayne said flatly. "That's not what cinema is about. Cinema is about strength, about character, about projecting the kind of power that audiences come to see. Cinema is about truth," Hawks said. "And that take was true. Your take is false. I've been making pictures for 40 years, John, and I'm telling you right now, that take 13 was the better performance by a significant margin. And you know it. That's why you felt the need to correct him." Wayne didn't respond. He just turned and walked away, finding a chair on the other side of the soundstage. Hawks looked at Dean, who was standing there with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes bright with the kind of anger that comes from having your work dismissed by someone you respected. "You okay?" Hawks asked. "Yeah," Dean said, but his voice was tight, controlled. "I'm fine." What happened next was the kind of moment that defines careers, the kind of moment that people in Hollywood would talk about for decades, the kind of moment that showed what kind of man you were, the kind of moment where you either chose safety or you chose truth. Dean walked over to John Wayne's chair. The entire set, despite being cleared, had people watching from doorways and behind equipment and from the catwalks above. Everyone was paying attention. Everyone knew something was about to happen. This was the kind of moment that people waited for. The kind of confrontation that revealed character, Duke Dean said, and his voice was quiet but absolutely steady. There was no tremor in it, no uncertainty, just pure, focused intention. "I want to talk to you about something, and I want you to listen, really listen, because I'm only going to say this once." Wayne looked up at him. There was something in his expression that suggested he was ready for a confrontation, ready to assert his dominance again. Ready to make it clear who is in charge? "You think I'm not a real actor," Dean said. "You think I'm a singer who stumbled into this and doesn't belong? You think I'm a lightweight who's diluting this picture just by being in it? You've made that very clear. For the past 5 weeks, we've been shooting this picture. Every correction, every comment, every dismissal, every way you've looked at me like I'm wasting your time. I've been trying to ignore it, trying to be professional. Trying to let my work speak for itself, trying to be the bigger man and not respond to your provocation." Wayne started to speak, but Dean held up his hand. "No," Dean said, "you don't get to interrupt. You've had 5 weeks of being able to say whatever you want, of dismissing me, of making me feel small. Now it's my turn, and you're going to listen?" Wayne's expression hardened, but he didn't say anything. "I know who you are," Dean continued. "I know what you've accomplished. I know that you're one of the greatest actors in cinema. I've watched your films, I've studied your performances. I came onto this set with respect for you, with genuine respect. I wanted to work with you because I thought it would make me better, because I thought I could learn from you. But what I've learned over these past weeks is that respect isn't mutual with you. You don't respect me, you don't respect my talent, you don't respect the choices I make as an actor. You see me as a threat." "A threat?" Wayne laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "To what?" "I'm not threatened by you, kid. I'm just trying to maintain standards." "You're threatened by the fact that I can do something you can't?" Dean said, and his voice was steady and certain. "You can project strength. You can play dominance. You can command a scene through sheer force of will. That's your gift. That's what makes you great, but you can't be vulnerable. You can't show weakness. You can't let an audience see the uncertainty underneath the confidence. And that's a limitation. It's a real limitation. And when you see me do it, when you see me access something that you can't, it makes you angry. So you lash out, you dismiss me. You try to make me small so that you don't have to face the fact that you might have a limitation." Wayne stood up. He was a big man, bigger than Dean, more imposing, broader through the chest, more intimidating in the way that physical presence could be. But Dean didn't back down. He didn't step back. He stood his ground. "I've worked my whole life to get to a place where I could work with you," Dean continued. And there was emotion in his voice now, but it was controlled emotion. Emotion that served his point rather than undercut it. "I've sung, I've danced, I've done comedy, I've done bit parts and small roles and anything I could find to build my craft, because I wanted to be good enough to work with you. Because I thought if I could prove myself to you, then I'd know I was good. But what I've learned is that your approval isn't worth sacrificing my integrity for." "Integrity," Wayne said, and there was a sneer in his voice. "You're lecturing me about integrity?" "Yes," Dean said. "I am, because integrity is about being true to your art. It's about not compromising what you believe is real just because someone more powerful than you tells you to. And you just made me compromise. You just made me take a genuine performance and turn it into something false because you couldn't handle the vulnerability in it." Wayne looked away. "That's your power," Dean said. "You're powerful enough that people will do what you want them to do. You're powerful enough that you can make people change their performances. You're powerful enough that you can humiliate them in front of the crew and they have to just take it because you're John Wayne. But that's not strength. Real strength would be recognizing when someone else has done something good and having the security in yourself to admit it." Dean turned to walk away. "And Dean?" Wayne called out. Dean stopped, but didn't turn around. "If you go out there and give that performance again, And you're doing it just because you're angry at me? If you're doing it just to prove a point, this picture is still going to suffer. Because a performance born out of defiance is as hollow as a performance born out of fear. And we both know it. Dean turned back around slowly, and something in Wayne's expression had changed. There was something different in his eyes. Not approval, exactly, but something like recognition. Like he'd just seen something in Dean that he hadn't expected to see. Like he'd just realized something about himself. You're right, Dean said. A performance born out of defiance would be hollow. But that's not what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do the take because I'm angry at you. I'm going to do it because it's the right take, because it's the true take. And it just happens to be the take that I did before you humiliated me. The take I did when I was just trying to tell a story. The take I did when I was being an artist instead of being afraid. And you think you can do that again? Wayne asked. Now that you're angry? Now that your pride is hurt? I don't think I can do it, Dean said. I know I can. Because the anger is going to burn away. The hurt is going to fade. And what's going to be left is the reason I did it in the first place. The truth that I was trying to express, that doesn't go away because someone told me I was wrong. If anything, it gets stronger. Because now it's not just about playing a character, it's about proving something to the crew, to myself. Then, I guess you had better make sure the performance is born out of something true, Wayne said. Something real. Something that can't be denied or dismissed or explained away. I guess I had better, Dean said. They reset for take 14. Everyone back on set. The entire crew knew what had happened. Nobody had been supposed to hear the conversation. But in the way of movie sets, where sound travels in strange ways and everyone is always listening, they knew that Dean and Wayne had fought. They knew that something had shifted. The energy was completely different now. Everyone was paying attention with a level of focus that usually only happened during important scenes. Everyone understood that this was a moment that mattered. The assistant director called for quiet on set. The sound mixer checked his levels. The camera operator made final adjustments. Everyone was ready. And then Hawks called action. The scene played out. And this time, it was different from anything that had come before. It was vulnerable and strong at the same time. It was a young man trying to be brave in the face of doubt. It was a moment where two characters learned to respect each other despite their differences. It was the moment where pride gave way to actual human connection. It was everything a great scene needed to be. It was the kind of performance that reminded everyone why they did this, why they worked such long hours for such difficult pay, why they put up with difficult personalities and impossible schedules. Because for moments like this, for moments where you captured something real, Hawks called cut and just nodded. One nod, that was all he needed. That was all anyone needed. Everyone knew. That was the take. That was the one. They could use it. They could build the picture around it. The set erupted in a different kind of silence. Not the tense quiet of conflict, but the satisfied quiet of having just witnessed something genuinely good, something genuinely real, something that couldn't be faked or manufactured or forced. The camera operators were shaking their heads in admiration. The grips were smiling. The script supervisor was making notes, not because she had to, but because she wanted to remember the take. The lighting operators were nodding to each other. This was craftsmanship. This was cinema. This was what it was supposed to be. After filming wrapped for the day, after everyone had been released and the set was being struck and the lights were being turned off, John Wayne found Dean in his dressing room. He knocked on the door and waited for Dean to invite him in. It was a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement that Wayne was asking permission to enter Dean's space, that he understood Dean had earned the right to set boundaries. "Come in," Dean said. Wayne entered and closed the door behind him. He stood there for a moment, just looking at Dean. Then he sat down without being asked, which was very John Wayne, but there was something different in the way he did it. Like he was sitting as equals, not as a superior, visiting an inferior. "That take," Wayne said, without preamble, "that was the best work I've seen you do. That was real acting. That was the kind of performance that reminds me why I do this." Dean didn't know what to say. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He'd prepared himself for many possible responses from Wayne. Anger, dismissal, a grudging acknowledgement, but genuine praise was not something he'd expected. "I was wrong about you," Wayne continued. He leaned back in the chair, his massive frame settling into it with the comfort of a man used to taking up space. "I thought you were coasting on charm. I thought you didn't take the work seriously. I thought you were here because Hawks had some idea about bringing in a name that would sell tickets. I thought you were diluting this picture by being in it. I was wrong on all counts. Duke, Dean said carefully, I appreciate that, but you don't have to. I do have to, Wayne interrupted, because you stood up to me today. You risked your career on this picture by challenging me in front of the crew. You risked my goodwill and my support and the possibility that I could make life very difficult for you in this industry. And you did it anyway, because you believed in your work. That takes guts. That takes integrity. That takes the kind of strength I've been talking about, the kind I thought you didn't have. Dean didn't respond, just listened. I think you're a better actor than I am, Wayne said simply. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was stating something obvious, something that had just become clear to him. I think what you did in that scene, the vulnerability, the honesty, it's something I've never been able to do. I've spent my whole career playing strong men, playing characters who don't show doubt, playing characters who always know what they're doing, and maybe that's made me great in my own way. Maybe that's given me a career and a legacy and the respect of millions of people, but it's also limited me. Maybe I've become so committed to that kind of performance, to that version of strength, that I've forgotten how to be real, how to be human, how to let an audience see that you can be afraid and be strong at the same time. That's not true, Dean said. You're a great actor. I'm a great actor within certain parameters, Wayne said. But those parameters have limits, and you just showed me what lies beyond them. Dean didn't know what to say. John Wayne was admitting that he was wrong. John Wayne was admitting that Dean was better than him. John Wayne was sitting in a dressing room and having a genuine conversation about the craft of acting and the limitations of his own technique. It was almost too much to process. I've been hard on you, Wayne said, his voice heavier now, more personal, because I was intimidated by you. Because I watched you come in here, a singer with limited film experience. Without the years of struggle I had, without the training I had, without the credential I had, and you still managed to deliver something genuine, something that audiences connect with, something that matters, and that made me angry. Because it suggested that maybe my way wasn't the only way. Maybe my way wasn't even the best way. Maybe all those years I spent grinding and struggling and proving myself, maybe there was another path. And if there was another path, then what did all my sacrifice mean? It means you were forging your own way, Dean said. It means you were doing what worked for you. That doesn't make what I'm doing better. It's just different. No, Wayne said. It is better. For this film, for this scene, your way was better. And I need to acknowledge that. I need to say it out loud. Because if I don't, then I'm the same man I was this morning. And I don't want to be that man anymore. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of what had just happened settling on both of them. I apologize, Wayne said finally, for the comments, for the dismissals, for the way I've treated you, for trying to make you into something you're not. You're good at being you. You should keep doing that. The world needs more people who are willing to be vulnerable, who are willing to show that strength and vulnerability aren't mutually exclusive. Dean extended his hand. Wayne shook it. And in that handshake was a complete reversal of the dynamic that had existed for weeks. It was a handshake between equals, between two actors who respected each other. Thank you, Dean said. No, Wayne said. Thank you for standing up to me, for not just accepting my judgment, for forcing me to actually see what you could do, for reminding me that acting isn't about projecting power, it's about telling the truth. When Wayne left the dressing room, he paused at the door and turned back. Dean, he said, I mean what I said. You're going to have a great career, because you have something that can't be taught. You have authenticity. Hold on to that. Don't let people like me convince you that it's weakness. Then he was gone. Dean sat down heavily on the couch in his dressing room. The adrenaline that had been sustaining him all day suddenly drained away, leaving him exhausted but also lighter somehow. He understood what had just happened. He understood that he'd just experienced something transformative, that he'd just taken the biggest risk of his career by calling out John Wayne on set in front of the crew, that he'd risked his entire future in Hollywood by standing up to a man who could have destroyed his reputation with a word. He'd risked being blacklisted. He'd risked never working at this level again. He'd risked everything, and it had worked. Not because he was right, though he was, but because he was willing to risk everything for what he believed in, because he was willing to choose integrity over safety, because he was willing to stand up for his art even when it meant challenging someone he respected and admired. The rest of the shoot was different, completely different. Wayne and Dean developed a genuine friendship, not the kind of friendship that comes from people naturally liking each other from the start, but the deeper kind that comes from mutual respect earned through conflict and honesty. They would talk between takes. Wayne would ask Dean about his approach to scenes, how he found the emotional truth, how he accessed vulnerability without indulging it. Dean would ask Wayne about his technique, about how he projected confidence, about the physicality of his performances. They were learning from each other, teaching each other, growing as artists because they were willing to be vulnerable in front of each other. There were other moments too, moments of levity. Wayne and Dean would joke around on set. Wayne would do impressions of the crew. Dean would do his comedy routine. They developed an ease with each other that hadn't existed before. It was the ease of two people who had fought and come through to the other side of the fight with respect and tact. The other cast members noticed the change. Angie Dickinson, who played the female lead, would comment on how different the dynamic was, how it felt like Wayne and Dean were truly working together rather than tolerating each other, how their scenes had a chemistry that was palpable, how you could feel the friendship beneath the conflict even when they were playing characters at odds with each other. Howard Hawks knew exactly what he was doing. By allowing real conflict to surface, he turned tension into depth. Once the confrontation was resolved, the atmosphere on set transformed. The final weeks of filming were energized by genuine respect, and the performances grew sharper and more natural. When Rio Bravo premiered in 1959, audiences and critics immediately noticed the chemistry between John Wayne and Dean Martin. Their relationship on screen felt real, layered with history, conflict, and mutual respect. No one knew about the private confrontation that made it possible. What they saw was the result of honesty replacing ego. The film's success changed both men. It established Dean as a serious actor and opened the door to deeper, more dramatic roles. For John Wayne, it marked a shift toward vulnerability, influencing the rest of his career. Rio Bravo became proof that real understanding between actors creates something no performance can fake. Years later, when Dean Martin was nearing the end of his life, he would talk about that moment on the Rio Bravo set. He would tell the story of standing up to John Wayne. He would talk about how terrifying it had been, how certain he was that he was throwing away his career, how he'd done it anyway because he couldn't accept being diminished anymore, how he'd decided that his integrity was worth more than his career. And he would always end with the same line. John Wayne, Dean would say, was the kind of man who could be corrected by someone smaller and younger and less established than him, and then could turn that correction into a lesson. That takes real strength. That takes real character. That's when I knew he was as good as everyone said he was. Not because he could project dominance, but because he could admit when he was wrong, because he could learn, because he could grow. For his part, John Wayne, in his final interviews before his death in 1979, would mention Dean Martin. He would talk about Rio Bravo and the actor who'd reminded him that there was more than one way to be great. He would tell people that Dean Martin had taught him more about acting in one confrontation than he'd learned in decades of work. He would talk about how that moment had changed his approach to filmmaking. I was so committed to being strong, Wayne would say, that I forgot that strength sometimes means admitting you're wrong. Dean showed me that, and it made me a better actor. And more importantly, it made me a better man. It made me understand that you can be powerful and humble at the same time. You can be confident and still capable of learning. You can be the most respected actor in Hollywood and still have room to grow. The relationship between John Wayne and Dean Martin became legendary in Hollywood, not because of what happened publicly, but because of what happened in that moment on the Rio Bravo set. Because of the moment when a younger actor risked everything to demand respect from an older actor, because of the moment when the older actor was wise enough to listen, because of the moment when two men chose honesty over ego, it became the kind of story that people told newcomers to Hollywood, the kind of cautionary tale and inspiration combined, a story about what was possible when two people were willing to be honest with each other, when two people were willing to stop playing the roles that Hollywood expected them to play, when two people chose growth and truth over the maintenance of hierarchies and dominance. The set photographer had captured some images that day. Images of Wayne and Dean in heated discussion. Images of Dean standing his ground. Images of two men facing off in front of the crew. Those images would never be published in newspapers or magazines. They were considered too private, too revealing of internal conflict. But they were preserved. They were held in studio archives. And decades later, when film students would study the dynamics of the set, when they would research the making of Rio Bravo, they would look at those photographs and understand what had happened. They would understand that this was a moment where something real had occurred, where art and conflict had collided and produced something better, where two people had fought and emerged stronger. When Rio Bravo was released, the press didn't ask much about the relationship between Wayne and Dean. The studio had carefully cultivated the narrative that they were friends, that they got along perfectly, that the picture was a labor of love for both of them, that everything on set had been harmonious and professional. The real story, the story of conflict and growth, remained hidden. It was the kind of story that only people on set would know. Only people who'd been there would understand the true dynamics. Only the people who'd lived through it would know what it had cost and what it had meant. What happened on the set of Rio Bravo shaped everything that followed. It changed how John Wayne approached his roles, making him more open to vulnerability and humanity. It also changed how Dean Martin approached his career, giving him greater confidence in his instincts and the courage to stand up for what he believed in, even when it carried real risk. The shift was visible in the way they treated each other afterward. In interviews and public appearances, there was an unmistakable mutual respect between them, earned through conflict and strengthened by honesty. They no longer stood in hierarchy, but as equals who had challenged each other and grown from it. The most important moment on that set wasn't the making of a great film. It was the moment Dean chose integrity over silence, deciding that protecting his self-respect mattered more than protecting his career. And it was the moment John Wayne, a man known for projecting absolute strength, proved strong enough to listen, admit fault, and learn. That willingness became his quiet legacy beyond the screen. A private photograph of them shaking hands captured that transformation. Though never published, it became a symbol of professionalism, humility, and the power of choosing honesty over ego. The Rio Bravo set became a lesson in how conflict, when handled with respect, can lead to growth instead of division. Dean and Wayne became genuine friends afterward. Years later, when Wayne died, Dean spoke of him not just as a legend, but as a man who taught him that true strength includes vulnerability, and that admitting you're wrong takes more courage than never being challenged. That lesson stayed with Dean for the rest of his life, shaping his performances and his choices. And the story itself lived on, passed through Hollywood as a quiet legend, one that showed real greatness doesn't come from dominance, but from honesty, humility, and the willingness to learn.